European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon Bonaparte was born at Ajaccio on the island of Corsica, Genoa, Italy. He was born in August 1769 after France had conquered the island in 1768. The French annexation of Corsica therefore meant that Napoleon Bonaparte was born a French man, and that enabled him to take on all opportunities that enabled him to rise to power. Napoleon I was born in a poor and humble family of 13 children, and he was among the 8 children who survived childhood and others died. His father was called Charles Bonaparte and his mother was called Letze. His poor background later shaped his ambition and character that were key to his power. His father, Carlo Bonaparte, who had aristocratic claims, flew to get Napoleon I admitted to the military academy of Brienne as early at the age of 10 years in 1789. He later moved to the Paris Military Academy in 1784, from where he graduated in military science as a qualified artillery officer, with the rank of a second lieutenant at the age of 16 years. While in these military academies, Napoleon I was placed among the children of the rich, where he felt lonely and out of place, but this condition forced him to be a hard-working student. He was good in math and military science, and this helped to build his military career. In 1792, Napoleon went for leave to Corsica, but he overstayed his leave, and this made him to be expelled from the army. However, he was fortunate enough that he was recalled to serve again in the army because of the European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Toulon. He repulsed and defeated Italian forces at the port of Toulon. He repulsed and defeated Italian forces at Tivone during the course of the French Revolutionary Wars. In 1795, he saved the Directory government from the Royalist supporters with a great shot, and that earned him promotion to a rank of a general. In 1796, Napoleon married a beautiful Josephine Beauharnais, now a former mistress to one of the directors called Paul de Barras, and this enabled Napoleon to gain aristocratic connections with the leaders of the Directory government, and that is why de Barras convinced Carnot, the minister war, to give Napoleon the command of the Italian campaign in 1796. During the Italian military campaign against Austrian forces, Napoleon Bonaparte was able to motivate the French demoralized and disorganized force into a successful campaign. Through his mobilization skills, oratory power, he was able to convince the French soldiers to take on the Italian military campaign when he said to them, "You're badly fed, partially naked, and going to lead you to the most plains of the world, where you will find rich cities, enjoy honor and glory." This speech boosted the morale of the French soldiers, who had a successful campaign against the Austrians, who were finally defeated and forced to sign the Treaty of Compromise in 1797. In the treaty, Napoleon gained territories for France, and also Napoleon returned with a lot of loot of Italian art pieces. After a successful Italian campaign, the Directory government got threatened by Napoleon's popularity, and this forced Carnot to again assign Napoleon command of another campaign, Egyptian military campaign in European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Directory Parliament to stage a coup d'etat. Brumaire on 9/November/1799 that ended the reign of the Directory government. After capturing power, Napoleon Bonaparte established a consulate government of 3 consuls, where he was the first consul, ABC as second consul, and Roger Daucus as a third consul. In 1800, a consular constitution was drafted, and it was agreed that each consul would rule for 10 years and then retire. In 1802, Napoleon organized a referendum in which he manipulated the consulate constitution that made Napoleon want to become a consul for life. In 1804, Napoleon I invited the Pope to crown him as emperor, and before the Pope could crown him, Napoleon I grabbed the crown from the Pope and crowned himself as Emperor of France. Therefore, by so doing, Napoleon I established an empire in France, and thus First French Empire. Factors that led to rise on Napoleon Bonaparte to power in France in 1799. A number of factors, both of his own making and those beyond his own making, played a significant role in Napoleon's rise to power, as the record shows. 1. Napoleon I's fortune of birth enabled him to rise to power in France in 1799. Napoleon I was born on the island of Corsica in 1769, a year after Corsica Island had been annexed by France in 1768. This therefore made Napoleon I to be born a French man, and not an Italian or Corsican. This fortune of birth made Napoleon I eligible to have access to any opportunities in a French society. It enabled him to freely participate in the French Revolution of 1789. During European history, Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Family. At school, he was discriminated because of his commoner descent by the sons of the rich nobles and clergy. The poor background made Napoleon want to work hard so as to change fortunes, and that's what made him to later become a successful military officer with a lot of ambition, which aided his rise to power in 1799 in France. 3. Napoleon I's education background also helped him to rise to power in France in 1799. Napoleon Bonaparte attained education in the military academies of Brienne from May 1799 to October 1784 and Paris Military Academy October 1784, October 1785, at the time when about 60% of the European population was illiterate. In 1785, he qualified as an artillery officer, a long-range guns, i.e. fighting using cannons, at the rank of a second lieutenant in the Military Academy of Paris at the age of 16 years. It was this education that equipped Napoleon I with military skills and leadership abilities which made him to carry out successful suppression of internal revolts as well as successful military campaign of 1796–97. This made him become very popular in the army and the French society, paving his way to rise to power by 1799 in France. 4. The role played by his father Carlos Bonaparte also helped Napoleon I to rise to power in 1799 in France. His father Carlo Bonaparte claimed that he was a noble himself and that gave chance to Napoleon Bonaparte to fuck education in the military academies of Brienne in 1799 and Paris 1784. Perhaps without such aristocratic claims of his father, maybe Napoleon wouldn't have gotten the chance and opportunity to get the military training he acquired from the above military academies, since he was born from poor family and education at this time was only for the sons of the noble and clergy. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815 registered success and became popular, especially during the Italian military campaign of 1796–97, when he was given a poorly equipped, partially naked and poorly fed army, and he injected morale in his troops, i.e. he told them, "You are badly fed, partially naked. I'm going to lead you to the most fertile plains in the world, where you will find rich cities, enjoy glory and wealth in areas Napoleon conquered." He was always welcomed because of his beautiful speeches, e.g. after the success of Italian military campaign, he told the Italians to welcome the French soldiers. To respect your culture and religion, the Italians looked at Napoleon as a liberator, savior and hero to the Italians. Hence the oratory power made Napoleon I very popular among the soldiers, thereby leading to his rise to power in 1799 in France. 6. The army nation guard that Napoleon Bonaparte commanded also helped him to rise to power in 1799 in France. Napoleon had a strong and well-disciplined army that was always loyal to him, i.e. it respected him and followed his orders. He used this very army for the military campaigns and conquests where he registered success and eventually became very popular, e.g. the Italian and Egyptian military campaigns of 1796 and 1798 respectively. He also used the same army in the military coup d'état of Romeo on 9/November/1799 that overthrew the Directory government and cleared the way for his rise to power in 1799 in France. 7. His personal courage also helped him to rise to power in 1799 in France. His personal courage played an important role in his rise to power in 1799, i.e. Napoleon I, a soldier, because of his courage, engaged himself in battles and wars which ordinary and fellow European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. 8. Napoleon I's political ambition also enabled him to rise to power in 1799 in France. Napoleon I was a very ambitious man, and combined with courage and ability helped him to rise to power in 1799. Napoleon I had a burning desire for power which was reinforced with opportunism, i.e. he wanted to become the leader of the whole world, which defeated except Britain. Hence his political ambitions made him to take on risky military campaigns of 1796 and 1798 respectively, where he became popular and finally rise to power in 1799 in France. 9. Napoleon Bonaparte's marriage to Josephine Beauharnais also contributed to the rise of Napoleon I to power in 1799 in France. Josephine, a widow of 34 years and daughter of Paul de Barras of the Directory government. This marriage connected Napoleon I to the leadership in France at this time, i.e. brought Napoleon I closer to the directors of Directory government, which enabled Napoleon I to be appointed to command important military campaigns, e.g. the Italian military campaign of 1796–97, which was successful and that made Napoleon I popular and consequently contributed to his rise to power in 1799 in France. 10. The role played by Napoleon I's brother Lucien Bonaparte also enabled him rise to power in 1799 in France. Napoleon I's brother Lucien Bonaparte was the president of the Council of 500 under the Directory government lower house of Parliament. Napoleon I had tried to stage a coup, but it failed when the Council of 500 lower house rejected his coup. However, his brother Lucien Bonaparte called in the army to disperse members of the council afterwards. Lucien introduced Napoleon I to the few members who had remained. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. 11. The weakness of the Directory government in France also contributed to the rise of Napoleon I to power in 1799 in France. The Directory government in France was the last government within the revolutionary period in France, and it ruled from 1795 to 1799. It was a middle-class dominated government, however. It had a number of weaknesses, i.e. unemployment, inflation, scarcity of commodities, etc. It had also failed to protect and defend the gains of 1789 revolution, i.e. the 1799 Second Coalition made Austria get back what she had lost. In the 1797 Comproformio Treaty, i.e. Belgium, Italian and Germany states, Rhinelands, etc. Hence the Directory government, because of being weak, it became unpopular in France, and it paved way for Napoleon's rise to power by 1799. Question: to what extent were the weaknesses of the Directory government in France responsible for Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power? It failed to promote democracy. It failed to maintain law and order, as there were many uprisings. It failed to protect Napoleon I's gains. The government over-relied on Napoleon I. The government failed to promote the French military glory. The government failed to protect Napoleon I's gains by the Treaty of Comproformio. The government failed to reconcile the RCC and the states. And B. Such weakness of the Directory government made the French masses to lose confidence in it, and instead supported Napoleon I, who later. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. Napoleon I was given a task to command military campaigns, e.g. Italian and Egyptian military campaign of 1796 and 1798 respectively. These two military campaigns made Napoleon I became very popular not only among the French masses, e.g. in Italian military campaign of 1796–97 he defeated Austria and forced to sign the Treaty of Comproformio of 1797, where France got territories like part of the Rhinelands, Austria, Netherlands, Belgium, Nice, Savoy and Lombardy, etc. Even though the Egyptian military campaign against Britain failed, Napoleon I had become popular already, hence the above situation led to the rise of Napoleon I to power in 1799 in France. 13. Napoleon Bonaparte's personal courage also contributed to his rise to power in France by 1799, i.e. Napoleon I, as a soldier, because of his courage, engaged himself in battles and wars which ordinary and fellow commanders couldn't accept to command. Therefore, because of his courage, Napoleon I accepted to command such risky military campaigns, i.e. the Italian and Egyptian military campaign of 1796 and 1798 respectively, and eventually won them, most especially the Italian military campaign of 1796–97, where he defeated Austria and forced her to sign Comproformio Treaty of 1797, where got France territories like Italian and Germany states, Belgium, etc., something that led to his popularity in France that finally enabled him rise to power in 1799 in France. 14. Napoleon Bonaparte's organization ability also helped to rise to power in 1799 in France. Napoleon Bonaparte had an organization. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. Territories to France, e.g. Belgium, etc., and this made him to be promoted to higher ranks that finally led to his rise to power in 1799. 15. The improvement in science and technology also contributed to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte to power by 1799 in France. By the time Napoleon Bonaparte joined the army, there were some new innovations put in place, i.e. use of maps, compass, better communication equipment, radio calls. The movement of troops during the wars became easy because of roads, improved maps, and compasses helped him to easily locate good fighting places for his army and even get to the right place where he could easily invade and attack his enemies. And by 1789 France had also improved on the weapons, i.e. cannon, that Napoleon I used in fighting, etc. The above innovations, i.e. compasses, maps, cannons, etc. were used by Napoleon I in the military campaigns that he won, i.e. Italian military campaign of 1796–97 that made him become popular, and finally helped to rise to power in 1799 in France. 16. Also luck and fate also helped Napoleon Bonaparte to rise to power in France by 1799. Luck was also instrumental in Napoleon's rise to power. Napoleon I was lucky in a number of ways that opportunities came his way that he took advantage of to rise to power, i.e. out of the 13 children in the family, he was among the 8 children who survived childhood, for he was lucky that his father flew him a place in the military academies Aubrienne in Paris. Though he was born from a poor family, it was also by luck he survived the Reign of Terror, where many people were guillotined, including Robespierre and other military officers, etc. Therefore, because of luck and fate was European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. Conclusion. Role of luck and fate. He was lucky to have been born a Frenchman, i.e. he was born in 1769, a year after the Italian island of Corsica had been annexed by France. He was lucky to have been among the 8 out of the 13 children who survived infant death. He was lucky to have been admitted to the military academies of Brienne and Paris. He was lucky to have survived the ROT, yet he was a member of the Jacobins Club and a friend to Robespierre. Lucky to have gotten married to Josephine. This brought him closer to Paul de Barras. Lucky that his brother was the president of the Council of 500 Lower House of Parliament, Lucien Bonaparte. Lucky he was given to command the Italian military campaign. 1796–97. Lucky to have been promoted in the army. Lucky that the French Revolution of 1789 broke out in France. Lucky to have survived in the Egyptian military campaign of 179,899, where his forces were defeated and managed to dodge Admiral Nelson on Medsea and escaped back to France in 1799. He was lucky that he staged a successful coup that overthrew the Directory government. Other factors that helped Napoleon to rise to power in 1799. Conclusion. 17. The outbreak of the French Revolution also contributed to the rise of Napoleon I to power in 1799. The 1789 revolution is considered the most important factor which provided a platform on which Napoleon I displayed his personal ability. It changed the order of European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Contribution of the 1789 French Revolution to the rise of Napoleon I. The 1789 revolution changed the political order in France, i.e. it swept away the absolute monarchy together with the old privileged aristocracy, and it created room for commoners and individuals of talent like Napoleon to rise to power. The old hereditary monarchy had collapsed in 1793, and this paved way for the rise of talented men like Napoleon I. The 1789 revolution abolished the old discrimination class system and instead offered equal opportunities to all those who were talented, e.g. in the army. Promotions were based on the social order, i.e. for one to be promoted to the rank of a commissioner, one had to be a son of a noble. To also hold public office, it was mostly reserved for the nobles and clergy. However, the French Revolution of 1789 destroyed the discriminative class system and came up with the revolutionary principle of equality, which enabled men of humble origins like Napoleon I to use their abilities that made them popular, hence enabling Napoleon to rise in 1799. The French Revolution of 1789 affected the army, i.e. many of the privileged soldiers were imprisoned or killed while others deserted and fled the country. This therefore created scarcity of good artillery officers to suppress revolts and fight in the Revolution army wars. This therefore enabled Napoleon I, who had earlier on been dismissed in the army, to be recalled to serve again in the army, the opportunity he used to raise to power in 1799. The French Revolution of 1789 created ground that enabled Napoleon. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. The French Revolution later on turned violent between 1792–1794. This was a period which France witnessed a reign of terror which claimed many lives of French men, including prominent politicians the likes of Madame Roland, Danton, Hebert, Robespierre, etc. The death of prominent politicians in France created a political vacuum that Napoleon I exploited to rise to power in 1799. The French Revolution of 1789 created internal enemies, especially from the Royalists who were against the destruction of the Bourbon monarchy. In 1793, the Royalists attacked France at Port of Toulon. In 1793, which uprising was crushed by Napoleon I, and thereafter Napoleon was promoted to the rank of a brigadier general. Again in 1795, there was another royalist uprising against the Directory government, and again Napoleon I came in to save the Directory government by suppressing the revolt. After that triumph, Napoleon I was elevated to rank of a general and commander of the interior army. Therefore, these internal uprisings that had been brought about by the revolution enabled Napoleon I to display his abilities by suppressing them, which in the end made him popular, thus leading to his rise to power in 1799. The French Revolution shaped Napoleon's political outbreak. The French Revolution led to the rise of revolutionary literature, which was much admired by Napoleon I. Napoleon read and greatly liked Jean-Jacques Rousseau's literature, and it was that revolutionary ideas of equality, liberty, and fraternity which he later preached and emphasized to the admiration of the French men who later supported him when he made a coup d'etat against the Directory government in 1799, hence leading to his power in France. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815, with the directors like Abbé Sieyès, Paul de Barras, who were all from the Jacobins Club. It were these Jacobin leading directors that proposed Napoleon's name to be appointed the commander of the interior army of France, as well as to command the Italian military campaign of 1796–97, which Napoleon I successfully commanded, thereby earning him popularity in France, which later aided his rise to power in 1789. The French Revolution of 1789 created weak revolutionary government, i.e. it led the rise of Directory government, i.e. it led the rise of Directory government of 1795–1799. However, this government was weak, e.g. it was characterized by power struggles among the directors. It was corrupt. It had self-centered directors who were self-seekers, and besides, the Directory government failed to protect Napoleon's gain for France. Such weaknesses made the Directory government to become unpopular in France, which forced the French masses to support Napoleon I in his coup d'etat against the Directory government in 1799, hence leading to his rise to power in France. The French Revolutionary Army also contributed to Napoleon I's rise to power by 1799. Napoleon I was able to convince the demoralized, poorly fed, idle, ill-equipped and ill-trained French army to undertake a number of internal assignments and external military expeditions/campaigns. In most of the assignments, Napoleon I was able to register success with the support of the French army, which success earned him promotions in the army as well as making him popular not only among the French people, something that paved his way to rise to power in 1799 in France. Question. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. Napoleon Bonaparte was a product of the French Revolution of 1789. Discuss. Two-sided question. A standpoint is called for, i.e. role played by French Revolution of 1789 and other factors. 18. The success of the military coup d'état of Brumaire on 9/9/1799 paved way for Napoleon's rise to power in 1799 in France. Napoleon's rise to power in France was also attributed to the success of the military coup d'état of 1799 when he was supported by the army, French people and some directors, i.e. abbés, bearers, etc. The coup d'état was against the Directory government because it was corrupt, inefficient, unpopular, and above all it had failed to protect and defend the gains of the revolution, etc., and therefore people wanted to change Napoleon Bonaparte, and this coup was assisted by his brother Lucien Bonaparte, who was the president of the Council of 500 abbés, bearers, dorcas, etc. N.B. In the final analysis, the main reason for Napoleon I's rise to power, which appears to outweigh others, was the French Revolution of 1789, which provided the ideas of equality, liberty, and fraternity that Napoleon used and became very popular and finally led to his rise to power in 1799. The political ambition of Napoleon I made him too referred to as a one-meal-a-day artillery officer and had sleepless nights, and he once said a man is supposed to sleep 2 hours, a woman 4 hours, and a fool 8 thus. Question. Napoleon Bonaparte's rise to power in France by 1799 was a result of circumstance of his own making. Discuss. Napoleon's own making. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. Annexation of Corsica. Role of his brother Lucien. Father's role. Weakness of Directory government. Outbreak of 1789 revolution. Promotion in army. Luck and fate. The internal domestic policy of Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1814. After the overthrow of the Directory government in 1799, Napoleon Bonaparte officially started his reign. A new constitution was drafted by a committee of lawyers under the influence of Napoleon. The constitution established a new government known as the Consulate, which existed in France between 1799 and 1804. The consulate was composed of 3 consuls, i.e. the first consul as Abbé and the third consul as Roger Dorcas. However, in 1804, Napoleon I crowned himself Emperor of France, hence taking on the title Napoleon I and the Napoleonic Empire / the First. The Napoleons defeated the Battle of Water 100 in 1815. His domestic policy. Before Napoleon I came to power in 1799, France was characterized by political, social, and economic crisis. What had been achieved during the course of the French Revolution was lost during the reign of terror of the Directory government. Napoleon therefore inherited a nation characterized by unemployment, inflation, financial and religious crisis, power struggle. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. Napoleon Bonaparte's domestic achievements. 1. Napoleon Bonaparte reorganized the French administration structure, which by every test and glorious he reorganized the French administration, and it became the basis of the French system of governance or administration. Napoleon I divided France into departments headed by prefects. The departments were subdivided arrondissements under sub-prefects. The arrondissements were further subdivided into communes under mayors. All these officials were directly and indirectly appointed by Napoleon I, and therefore they were answerable to him. The ordinary Frenchmen supported Napoleon's system of government because it promised them peace and stability, and also tried to end cases of corruption, embezzlement, and inefficiency, hence a big achievement. 2. In Napoleon Bonaparte signed a concordat, an agreement with the Pope. The French Revolution of 1789 had strained the relations between the Roman Catholic Church and the state, France with other European Catholic countries, as well as with the Pope, especially the passing of the civil constitution of the clergy of 1790 and the nationalization of church land. But through the concordat, Napoleon I reconciled the RCC and the state, as he remarked, a state without religion is like a vessel ship without a compass direction. This agreement was important because the RCC was recognized as the faith of the majority of Frenchmen, and its rulers, i.e. Catholicism, became the state religion, but other religions were also allowed to worship. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. The non-juring priests were released from prison, and those in exile were to come back home. Either bishops were to appoint priests, but both were to be paid by the state. The Pope recognized the work of the French Revolution, and he accepted that all nationalized land of the Church was not to be claimed by the Church. Therefore, this agreement concordat by far helped to reconcile and reduce tension between the Church and the state in France, hence an achievement. 3. Napoleon Bonaparte reconciled with the emigrants, i.e. extended an olive branch to the emigrants, and many of them were called back and incorporated into the state system. Some of their property that had been confiscated and sold during the course of the Revolution was returned to them. However, the émigrés were required to denounce their claims of being a noble of France. Many of the jailed political prisoners were released, and that helped to reduce the political tension between the government and the old order in France, hence a big achievement requested by Napoleon I. 4. Napoleon Bonaparte also made financial reforms in France, and this improved the financial situation in the country. It should be noted that before Napoleon I came to power, France experienced a persistent financial crisis as well as chronic inflation, which was worse off during the time of the Directory government. However, in 1800, Napoleon I established the Central Bank of France, and thus European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. 5. Napoleon Bonaparte also introduced a new gold currency called the franc for France that replaced the devalued assignats that were in circulation during the course of the French Revolution of 1789. Napoleon I, through the National Bank of France, stabilized that French currency, and its value was determined by gold. This helped to improve the French economy, i.e. increase the volume of trade internally in France, hence an achievement registered by Napoleon I. 6. Napoleon Bonaparte also went ahead to improve and standardize the weights and measures that were introduced by the Directory government, and this saved the French masses from being cheated by the crafty businessmen, something that improved on the economic welfare of the French people, and this won Napoleon I's support of the French masses, hence an achievement registered by Napoleon I. 7. Napoleon Bonaparte also improved on the taxation system in France. Before Napoleon I rose to power, France had a discriminative poor taxation system which was regressive in nature, i.e. not based on one's income. However, when Napoleon I took over power, people were fairly taxed according to their ability to pay, and there were no tax exemptions for the nobles and the clergy. The tax farmers/collectors were required to deposit the tax proceeds to the bank to avoid corruption. The defeated and conquered states were made to pay indemnity, and this helped to support the French economy, hence an achievement registered by Napoleon I. 8. Napoleon Bonaparte made reforms in education. Before he rose to power in 1799, France had a poor education system of very low standard. However, he initiated a number of reforms in the education sector which laid a foundation for the modern French education. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. France with 17 facilities or academies/branches that were distributed throughout France, and the universities. Grand Master/Chancellor was chosen to be the controller of the entire French education. This therefore helped to boost literacy not only in France but across Europe, hence an achievement made by Napoleon I. 9. Napoleon Bonaparte also promoted constitutionalism in France. Between 1800 to 1810. Napoleon I ruled in accordance to the Consular Constitution of 1800. The Constitution clearly separated the powers of the executive, the legislative, and the judiciary. This constitution was made public, and referendum was organized where people were made to vote in favor of the constitution or against it. Eventually, the constitution was endorsed by the French men. The constitution also provided for human rights, freedom of worship, press, and association. Besides, Napoleon also accommodated parliamentary democracy, where a parliament of 300 legislatures was put in place, and this helped to check and balance the powers of the executives, hence a big achievement registered by Napoleon I. 10. Napoleon Bonaparte promoted industrial development, i.e. Napoleon I imposed protective tariffs to shield the French industries from foreign competition. New industries were also built, and this helped to create job opportunities for many French men. Commerce and advisory boards for the French traders and manufacturers. This in general boosted the French commerce and trade, hence a big achievement registered by Napoleon I. 11. Napoleon I allowed free ownership of land and any other property during his reign. Napoleon I allowed the French peasants to retain the land and any other property that they had acquired during the course of the French Revolution of 1789. He also abolished European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. 12. Napoleon Bonaparte encouraged agricultural development and reforms in France. In the first place, he restored peace and stability in France, which created a conducive atmosphere for agriculture to flourish. Government expenditure on agriculture was also increased to boost agricultural production. Land reclamation programs and drainage of swamps was done to increase cultivatable land. Agricultural experts were brought from Belgium to try and train the French farmers on the use of better quality seeds as well as modern farming methods. All this helped to create a food basket for France and save the French masses from starvation and famine and provided employment to the French people, hence a big achievement of Napoleon. 13. Napoleon Bonaparte made reforms in the army, i.e. the French army was enlarged through increased and compulsory military recruitment, military conscription. The army was also trained and equipped with modern weapons of the time. Napoleon, therefore, built a strong army in France which became the strongest on land, hence making France the strongest land power on European continent. Promotion in the army was based on merit and encouraged hard work and discipline among his soldiers. With this army in place, was able to keep law and order in France by dealing with his political opponents, and externally the French army fought successful battles through which France acquired territories, thus expanding and creating the Napoleon Empire in Europe. 14. Napoleon Bonaparte created the Legion of Honor. This was a new kind of nobility that Napoleon created. He was determined to reward those who had done distinguished services to the state, i.e. in civil service, commerce, army, etc., which these had to be rewarded and recognized for their efforts in serving the state. Napoleon once said, "Men are led by toys." Therefore the Legion of Honor instilled loyalty among the Frenchmen towards the emperor. This led to hard working and efficiency because government officials and military officers expected rewards, i.e. medals, gifts, presents, etc., hence a big achievement registered by Napoleon. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. 15. Napoleon Bonaparte also instituted what was called career open to talents. Under this patriotic policy, the revolutionary principle of equality was to be promoted, where appointment and promotions in the army and government offices. Public service was to be based on meritability in one's performance. Under this policy, Napoleon completely destroyed the social segregative class system that had existed in France before 1789, where promotions were made basing on one's birth, i.e. to only nobles and clergy, hence an achievement registered by Napoleon. 16. Napoleon Bonaparte improved on public works in France. Napoleon made infrastructural development in France. He employed the prisoners of war to construct and maintain many public projects, and this improved on the transport sector in France. New roads, canals, railways, lines and ports were constructed and old ones renovated. By 1811, Napoleon had built over 220 roads, and most importantly, he had built the Transalpine road that linked France to parts of Italy, Austria and Germany states. This infrastructural development helped to enhance trade and commerce within France and also with other European countries, thus an achievement made by Napoleon Bonaparte. 17. Napoleon Bonaparte also beautified many French major cities, i.e. slums in big cities, especially in Paris, were cleared up. He planted flower gardens, installed street lights, old palaces were renovated. The French museum was stocked with looted art pieces, lost treasures that Napoleon had plundered during the Italian military campaign of 1796–97. Such beautification of France promoted French tourism, since Paris became a major tourist center and one of the most beautiful cities in Europe, hence a big achievement registered by Napoleon. 18. Napoleon Bonaparte promoted and exported the French revolutionary ideas, i.e. equality, liberty and fraternity, to other parts of Europe. Many conquered states like Belgium, Italian states and Germany came to enjoy the revolutionary benefits of the French. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Revolution. Feudalism was abolished, freedom of worship was encouraged in the states that Napoleon had conquered for France, and they also came to feel the revolutionary ideas of equality, liberty, fraternity and democracy, all which revealed Napoleon as a true son of the 1789 revolution. 19. Napoleon Bonaparte codified the French laws. Napoleonic codes made legal reforms in France. Before Napoleon rose to power, France had no clear laws and there existed chaotic judicial system full of variations. During the course of the French Revolution of 1789, the National Convention had started on the work of compiling the French laws, but it didn't complete it. It was Napoleon who worked on it, and he unified the legal system in France. He appointed a committee of prominent lawyers who worked on the legal process in France, and they came up with what they called Code Napoleon, Napoleonic codes, which was a set of laws that would govern France. They came up with the following codes: the Civil Code, the Criminal Code/Code of Crime, the Commercial Code, the Commercial Code. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Divorce, parentage, inheritance of property, etc. These legal reforms made by Napoleon made him popular because they were adopted by many countries, not only in Europe but also globally, thus a big achievement registered by Napoleon. Summary of Napoleon's achievements: infrastructural development, legal reforms, Legion of Honor, career open to talents, exportation of revolutionary ideas, financial reforms, reconciled the RCC plus state, tax reforms, expanded the French borders, industrial development, military reforms, Gave France a constitution in 1800. Education reforms. Agriculture development. Beautified France. Currency reforms. Reconciled with emigrants. Promoted constitutionalism. The failures of Napoleon in his domestic policy. 1. Napoleon Bonaparte became a dictator. He centralized all the powers to himself and left no room for democracy, especially at higher levels of administration. E.g. in 1804, he violated the consular constitution of 1800 and declared himself the emperor, and this made Napoleon Bonaparte impose his views on the French masses, something that promoted dictatorship in France. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. 2. Napoleon Bonaparte ignored parliamentary democracy, i.e. in 1799 he introduced a consular government in France. However, in the consular constitution of 1800, Napoleon was given a lot of powers. The French parliament was there in name and just acted as a rubber stamp to endorse Napoleon's wishes. Napoleon never organized any election, and this denied the French masses of a representative government, and this was a violation of the revolutionary principle of equality. By doing so, Napoleon was deviating from the expectations of the revolutionaries, and therefore he couldn't be considered to be a true son of the French Revolution of 1789. 3. Napoleon Bonaparte revived arbitrary arrests in France. I.e. Napoleon revived the system of lettre de cachet, especially from 1810 onwards, because of the growing opposition against his rule at home and in the conquered states because of his dictatorship. Napoleon therefore arrested and imprisoned all those who were critical of his administration, and this reminded the French masses of the Preminence 1789 situation in France. Hence Napoleon was going against the expectations of the French revolutionaries. 4. Napoleon Bonaparte revived the class system in France, i.e. through his Legion of Honor. Napoleon created a new class of nobility because he rewarded only those who had provided exceptional services to the state. By 1814, Napoleon I had created about 3,000 hereditary nobles that included princes, dukes, and most of whom were military officers, hence reviving class stratification in France, which was a sign of failure. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Therefore, Napoleon tried to closely monitor the press, i.e. a number of legal newspapers was reduced from 70 in 1800 to only 4 by 1810. Those who defied the government orders and published anti-government articles were either imprisoned or harmed, and this undermined the revolutionary principle of liberty, thus a sign of failure. 6. Napoleon Bonaparte imprisoned the Pope, i.e. Napoleon went ahead and violated the 1810 Concordat Agreement. When invaded the Papal States, e.g. Lazio, Umbria, Marchant, Romagna arrested the Pope and imprisoned him. The conflict between Napoleon and the Pope started because the Pope, who promised to remain neutral in any conflict, violated the continental system when he started to secretly trade with Britain, yet Napoleon's continental system had forbidden any nation not to trade with Britain. However, in 1809 Napoleon invaded and occupied the Papal States, arrested and imprisoned the Pope to the disappointment of Catholics in France and all over Europe, hence a sign of failure. 7. Napoleon Bonaparte, through his education, banned the teaching of liberal subjects like political science, history, literature, and political education. These subjects were seen as a threat to Napoleon's administration, since they would politically awaken the French masses, as well as exposing his weaknesses. By so doing, he violated the revolutionary principle of liberty and freedom of expression, hence a sign of failure by Napoleon. 8. Napoleon Bonaparte promoted militarism by emphasizing the teaching of military science. Military training was made. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. 9. Napoleon Bonaparte's education reforms were discriminative against a violation of the revolutionary principle of equality. Napoleon once remarked, "I don't think we need to trouble ourselves with any plan of instruction for young females. Public education is not suitable for them because they will never be called upon to act in public. Marriage and kitchen work is all they look for." To Napoleon, women were to be taught religion and morals to enable them to be submissive to their husbands. This was to the disappointment of women and many revolutionaries, as it disregarded the principle of equality, regardless of sex, hence a sign of failure. 10. Napoleon Bonaparte passed laws that were against women and that neglected the principle of equality and also violated the rights of women. His Napoleonic codes, i.e. civil code, made women inferior to men. He said to the angel to Eve to obey her husband. Adam, it should be written in our code. The penal code provided for severe punishment for women who disobeyed their husbands. Women were to be under the control of their husbands, and they couldn't acquire or sell property without the consent of their husbands. To worsen matters, Napoleon's code allowed men to divorce their women, all which was against the revolutionary principle of equality, hence a sign of failure by Napoleon. 11. Napoleon Bonaparte left the elementary education, nursery, and primary education under the control of the Roman Catholic Church, as the situation was before the outbreak of the Revolution of 1789. This angered a section of Frenchmen, especially those. European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Mother from Corsica and made her the Empress of France, he made his brother Lucien Bonaparte Minister of the Interior. This nepotism was not different from the hereditary system of the ancient regime/Bourbon monarchy in France, and so this portrayed Napoleon as a famine in his domestic policy. 13. Napoleon Bonaparte fought many endless wars which cost France many lives as well as property and financial resources, e.g. in the Peninsular War against Spain and Portugal in 1808. France lost about 30,000 soldiers. The war against Russia, the Moscow military campaign of 1811–12, France lost 410,000 soldiers. Therefore these wars consumed a lot of resources as well as bringing suffering to the French masses. 14. Napoleon Bonaparte forced the French people into the army, i.e. military conscription, so as to raise a big army that would enable him to achieve his ambitions of conquering Europe. However, the recruits were hurriedly trained and sent to the field without enough experience, and this made many of them to perish, hence a sign of failure. 15. Napoleon also contributed to the decline of the French economy, i.e. many Napoleonic wars drained the French economic resources, and the endless wars created political instability that disrupted economic activities, and in the end they broke out social and economic problems in France such as inflation, unemployment, famine and starvation. And this decline in the French economy made Napoleon unpopular and in the end contributed to his downfall in 1815. 9. European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. One deviated from the expectations of the revolutionaries, thus a failure of Napoleon Bonaparte. 17. Napoleon Bonaparte's continental system brought a lot of suffering to the French masses. The continental system was designed by Napoleon to try and defeat Great Britain economically, however this economic policy war had adverse on Europe. The system blocked the British superior and cheap manufactured goods from entering other European countries, France inclusive. This made the French men more so the business, and this led to industrial breakdown and unemployment in France. It made Napoleon unpopular because it was against the revolutionary expectations. Question. 1. How far can Napoleon Bonaparte be considered a successful man in his domestic policy? I. Achievements plus failures of Napoleon. 2. How successful was Napoleon's domestic policy? Achievements and failures of Napoleon. 1. 3. To what extent did Napoleon I fulfill the aspirations/expectations of the French revolutionaries, i.e. achievements plus failures? 4. To what extent did Napoleon right the wrongs of the French society? Achievements plus failures of Napoleon. The internal/foreign policy of Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1814. Napoleon on foreign policy was focused on promoting French glory abroad/beyond the borders of France. His foreign policy was largely aggressive, dominated by the Napoleonic Wars of Conquest. Napoleon's European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. D. The Continental System/Economic War against Great Britain in 1806. 1813. E. The Peninsular War of 1808–1811. The war against Spain and Portugal. F. Napoleon's dynastic policy. G. Imprisonment of the Pope and the annexation of the Papal States in 1809. H. Napoleon's Marie-Louise in 1810. I. The Moscow military campaign war against Russia of 1811–12. J. The formation of the Fourth Coalition against Napoleon and his defeat at the Battle of All Nations, Leipzig 1830–1814. K. Napoleon's examen to the island of Elba, his escape back to France in the 100 days. L. The Vienna Congress of 1814–15 and Napoleon's final defeat at the Battle of Water 100 in Belgium 1815. The war against the Second Coalition between 1798–1802. Second Coalition. Between 1798–1802 France was faced with aggression from members of the Second Coalition that was made up of countries like Great Britain, Russia, Austria, Turkey, Naples and Portugal. Napoleon quickly organized the French troops after they had been defeated in the Egyptian military campaign of 1789–99 and managed to again defeat Austrian troops at the Battle of Marengo, March 1800. The French forces also defeated the Second Coalition troops in the Germany states at the Battle of Hohenlinden. After defeating Austrian troops, Napoleon forced Austria to sign the Treaty of Lineville, in which Austria surrendered Poland, Switzerland and the other territories that Austria had lost as per the 1797 Treaty of Compiègne. Roman II. Napoleon managed to defeat other members of the Second Coalition with the exception of Britain. Napoleon therefore entered a loose alliance with Denmark and Sweden to try and isolate Britain that was dominating the major international European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. B. The Peace Treaty of Amiens with Britain in 1802. The treaty had the following terms. I. Britain was to surrender the South African Cape and in turn, France was to vacate Holland. Roman 2. Britain recognized the French conquests and boundaries as by 1792. Roman 3. France agreed to vacate Egypt, which was given back to Turkey of the Ottoman Empire, and also France agreed to vacate southern Italy. Roman 4. Britain agreed to surrender the French states she had confiscated by Britain to give back the territories of Malta, West Indies and St. Lucia to France, and in return Britain was to retain Trinidad and Ceylon, Sri Lanka. N.D. The Treaty of Amiens was just a treaty of convenience, marriage of convenience between Britain and France to reorganize themselves for war again, because when Britain refused to surrender Malta to France, France also refused to give up Egypt to Turkey, and war resumed in 1803. See the renewal of the war against Great Britain. It is not clear who declared war first, however, to provoke the British. Napoleon captured Hanover, a Germany territory administered by Britain. Napoleon insisted that France would retain Hanover as long as the island of Malta remained in the hands of the British. At sea, Britain used her navy to cut off France from her colonies. In return, Napoleon prepared to hurt England by crossing the English Channel. The first French fleet was defeated completely off the Cape of Trafalgar by Admiral Nelson in October 1805. The French defeat at the Battle of Trafalgar saved England from a direct French invasion, and it has remained of historic importance. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Only be a master of the sea for only 6 hours, England would cease to exist. The formation of the Third Coalition against Napoleon won off 1805. I. Austria detested the French domination of the Italian states and the humiliation at the Treaty of Campoformio of 1797 and Lineville of 1801. Woman 2. Alexander I, the Tsar of Russia, disliked the French revolutionary ideas and Napoleon's colonial expansions. Roman 3. Sweden under Gustavus Roman 4 also disliked the French revolutionary ideas and French influence. Though Prussia was also alarmed by French influence, she was bitterly jealous of Austria, and so at first she kept out of the Third Coalition, though later she joined. In the war against the Third Coalition, France started with Austria. Napoleon, after his defeat at Trafalgar at the hands of the British Navy, he turned his attention to Central Europe, and he marched his forces against Austria, whom he defeated at the Battle of Elma on River Danube. The Austrian forces, estimated to be about 250,000 under General Mark, were forced to surrender. After their surrender, Napoleon entered the Austrian capital, Vienna, without much struggle. The remaining Austrian army retreated and joined the Russian troops. Tsar Alexander I of Russia and his Austrian counterpart Francis I combined to fight the French forces commanded by Napoleon himself. On 2nd/Dec/1805, the three emperors came face to face at the Battle of Austerlitz, and Napoleon once again defeated his enemies, forcing Austria to sue for peace. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. I. Austria lost to France a territory on the Adriatic Sea in Dalmatia. Roman 2. Venetia, formerly under Austria, was added to Kingdom of Italy, a territory under French influence. Roman 3. Bavaria and Württemberg became independent Germany states. Effects of the Treaty of Pressburg. The Treaty of Pressburg reduced Austrian control and influence over Germany states in Europe. The Holy Roman Empire under Austrian control was dismantled, and in its place, Napoleon created the Confederation of the Rhine under French influence. Germany states were divided into three parts, i.e. Prussia was dominant in the north, Austria in the south, and the Confederation of the Rhine comprising of 16 states. Within the Confederation of the Rhine, Napoleon abolished the old feudal systems, improved on the taxation system, reorganized and defeated the army, which he used in the subsequent wars of conquest. N.E. After humbling Austria, Napoleon's remaining obstacles were Britain, Russia, and later Prussia. In the war against Austria and Prussia, Napoleon made it sure that Prussia remained neutral after promising her Germany territory of European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. The remaining Prussian forces joined the Russian forces, but they were defeated at the Battle of Friedland on June 14, 1807. The Russian Tsar Alexander decided to sue for peace with Napoleon, and for several days the two emperors met in the middle of the River Niemen, and in July 1807 the two emperors signed the Treaty of Tilsit. The Treaty of Tilsit had the following terms. I. The Prussian provinces in the west were formed into the Kingdom of Westphalia when Napoleon made his brother Jerome Bonaparte to be king. Roman 2. Prussia Poland in the west, including the Grand Duchy of Warsaw, was added to be the Kingdom of Saxony. Roman 3. Prussia gained part of Finland and part of Prussia Poland, and King Frederick William 111 of Prussia recognized Napoleon's conquest of 1807. Roman 4. Russia was promised a free hand in Eastern Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and the Balkan region. The Russians saw a promise to join Napoleon in an economic war against England. After the defeat and humiliation of Prussia, Napoleon extended French influence in the Germany areas. Austria also having been defeated, all Germany and Italian states were at Napoleon's mercy. After humbling member states of the Third Coalition of 1805, Napoleon's remaining obstacle was now Great Britain, and he therefore planned an economic war against Britain. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. The Continental System / Economic War against Britain in 1860–1807. Napoleon had failed to defeat Great Britain at sea in spite of his overwhelming victory against other enemies on land. Napoleon therefore adopted a new strategy called the Continental System, which was established by the Berlin Decrees of 1806 and the Milan Decrees of 1807. Under the Continental System, France and her allies declared an economic war on Great Britain, where they closed their markets to British goods and their ports British merchant vessels. Under that arrangement, Napoleon hoped to cripple the economy of England through his Continental System. Through the decrees of Milan 1807 and Berlin Decree of 1806, Napoleon also planned to use the Danish fleet to patrol the European coastal line to ensure that British goods were not smuggled into any European country. In the short run, Napoleon's Continental System succeeded, and somehow British trade was frustrated. Napoleon enforced the Continental System in France and in any other countries under French influence, and he ordered for the confiscation of British goods wherever they were sold. Britain then reacted to Napoleon's Continental System by passing the London Orders in Council. In these London decrees, Britain called upon to all ports of Europe to be open to British trade as soon as possible, or lost those countries that maintained their ports post-war. As a result, in November 1807, Britain invaded Denmark, and he confiscated the Danish fleet that Napoleon was planning to use to enforce his Continental System. The British action made Napoleon's Continental System to stop backfiring. Rome to Britain being the most industrialized of Europe, a workshop. Other European colonies were dependent on Britain, and therefore many countries started jumping out of Napoleon's Continental System because of the economic hardships it created, such as shortage of essential commodities, closure of industries, unemployment, inflation, etc. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. It were the negative effects of the Continental System that made Napoleon Bonaparte start another wave of wars against those countries that had refused to implement the Continental System. The Peninsular War 1808–1811. The Peninsular War was a war that Napoleon Bonaparte fought against Spain and Portugal in Italian peninsula. Napoleon's decision to fight in the peninsula was due to a number of reasons that included Portugal's refusal to enter the Continental System and Napoleon I. Napoleon's proposal to partition Portugal wasn't welcomed by the Spanish and Portuguese. The enthronement of Napoleon's brother Joseph Bonaparte as the King of Spain annoyed the Spanish, hence forcing them to fight Napoleon. Napoleon was also reacting to the British support to both Spain and Portugal in the struggle against Napoleon. Portugal and Spain were inspired by the growing wave of European nationalism that had started resisting Napoleon. The Peninsular War was one of the most disastrous ventures in Napoleon's career, and many historians regarded it as a cancer that drained away Napoleon's strength, because Napoleon lost about 300,000 troops, and even his enemies learned some of his tactics that they used to. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. His mother, who was simple housewife and installed as the Empress Mother. His brother Joseph Bonaparte was made King of Naples and later Spain. Louis Bonaparte was made King of Holland. Jerome Bonaparte was made King of Westphalia Rhinelands. His sister Caroline married Marat, a great French general who became the Queen Naples, while brother Lucien Bonaparte was made Minister of Interior. In other words, Napoleon used nepotism to try and entrench his influence in Europe. Napoleon's imprisonment of the Pope and annexation of the Papal States 1808–1809. Napoleon's policy of the Continental System brought him into conflict with the Pope, who wished to remain neutral in Napoleon's economic war against Britain. The hardships that Napoleon's Continental System caused to the people of the Papal States, the Pope started to secretly trade with Britain, and this annoyed Napoleon. In 1809, Napoleon invaded the Papal States, arrested the Pope, and imprisoned him in France, and later annexed the Papal States to his empire. Napoleon had forgotten that he had at one time remarked that "treat the Pope as if he had 100,000 of me." This quarrel with the Pope angered the Catholic states in Europe and undermines Napoleon's moral position in France, which was a predominantly Catholic state, and decides Napoleon had violated that 1801 Concordat he had signed with the Pope. Napoleon's marriage alliance with Austria in 1810. In an attempt to renew diplomatic ties with Austria, Napoleon Bonaparte opened up a marriage tie with Austria. In 1810, Napoleon divorced Josephine, a daughter and mistress to one of the directors, Paul de Barres. Napoleon then married an Austrian Princess Marie-Louise. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. J. Napoleon Bonaparte and the Moscow Campaign of 1811–1812. The Moscow Campaign was Napoleon's military expedition against the Tsar of Russia, which was a result of a number of reasons. The Tsar of Russia had refused to accept and cooperate with Napoleon's continental system, where the Tsar continued to allow British goods into Russia. 2. Tsar Alexander I continued to impose high tariffs on the French goods entering Russia, which annoyed Emperor Napoleon. 3. The Tsar was not happy with Napoleon's marriage to the Austrian Princess Marie-Louise because, in the eyes of the Tsar, Napoleon would always look for Austrian help in case of war against Russia. 4. Napoleon was annoyed that Tsar Alexander had failed to provide assistance to France following the France-Austrian War that ended with the defeat of Austria at the Battle of Wagram in July 1809. Napoleon's creation of the Grand Duchy of Warsaw worried Russia, i.e. the Grand Duchy of Warsaw was intended to create the independent state of Poland, and that was rejected by Russia because Russia had millions of Polish subjects. 6. Tsar Alexander I and Napoleon was struggling for supremacy and control the Balkan region and the Mediterranean. As a result of the above circumstances, Napoleon decided to invade Moscow to teach the Tsar a lesson in what came to be known as the Moscow Military Campaign of 1811–12. However, it turned out to be the most appalling military disaster in Napoleon's history. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815 burnt down the city and resorted to the scorched earth policy so that Napoleon Bonaparte could not feed his soldiers. Death and desertion reduced Napoleon's army. By the time Napoleon entered Moscow, it was time of the Russian winter, and unfortunately Napoleon had not carried winter coats for his soldiers, and it also proved menial to the French soldiers, i.e. many of them died of coldness. Napoleon was forced to withdraw, having failed to conquer Russia, and he only reached Paris with about 20,000 troops out of 610,000 troops, i.e. he lost about 590,000 troops. The Moscow Military Campaign of 1811–12 was a disaster because Napoleon lost most of his trusted generals, and this weakened Napoleon militarily, which in the end contributed to his downfall, i.e. it became a boomerang in Napoleon's political career. The formation of the Fourth Coalition. Although Napoleon Bonaparte had been defeated by Spain and Portugal in the Peninsular War of 1808 and later on by Russia in the Moscow Military Campaign of 1811–12, European powers were still free carried by Napoleon. Therefore, European powers decided to send a message Frankfurt proposal to Napoleon Bonaparte suggesting to him the need to make peace with him and not to fight him anymore. However, Napoleon rejected the proposal, even though most Frenchmen were in favour of it because they were tired of the Napoleonic Wars and too much bloodshed. When Napoleon rejected the proposal to make peace with European powers decided to form the Fourth Coalition in 1813, championed by Great Britain, who was joined by Russia and Austria. In October 1813, the Allies overwhelmed the French forces because it was very strong for an already weakened French army, and the French forces were defeated at the Battle of Leipzig, popularly known as the Battle of Nathon. The French forces rapidly retreated across Germany states with the Allies in pursuit, and on 31st March 1814, the Allied forces entered Paris, and at this end the Allies signed with France the Treaty of Fontainebleau, April 1814. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Question: account for the formation of the Fourth Coalition against Napoleon Bonaparte in 1813. Napoleon's rejection of the Frankfurt proposal by Allies. Effects of the Moscow Campaign. Weakness of the French troops. Effects of the Peninsular War of 1808–11. Desertion of Napoleon's forces to the Allies. Imprisonment of the Pope in 1809. Marriage to Marie-Louise. Dynastic policy. Effects of the continental system. Napoleon's dictatorship in conquered states. Rise of European nationalism. The Treaty of Fontainebleau of April 1814. This was the treaty that the Allied powers dictated upon Napoleon after his defeat at the Battle of Leipzig, Battle of Nations, and it had the following provisions. Napoleon had to abdicate, give up the French throne. 2. Napoleon was to be made the ruler of the small Mediterranean island of Elba. 3. Napoleon was allowed to retain the title of Emperor. 4. Napoleon was to receive a pension of about £200,000. As clearly indicated above, the Treaty of Fontainebleau was kind to Napoleon with the hope of restoring peace in Europe. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. b. The balance of the war indemnity expected by France from Prussia was to be cancelled. C. France was not to pay any war indemnity of the damages caused revolutionary France and France under Napoleon. Napoleon's 100 days and his final defeat at Waterloo in 1815. After Napoleon's defeat at Leipzig and after the signing of the Treaty of Fontainebleau, Napoleon was then exiled to the island of Elba. The Allies then called a European Congress at the Austrian capital, Vienna, to try and come up with solutions to problems that Napoleon had left behind in Europe. While at the Vienna Congress, which started in November 1814, apart from feasting, the Allies were also involved in serious discussions of solving important European matters. In that confusion, Napoleon escaped from Elba in February 1815 and landed in an airbase in southern France, where he was welcomed by the French people, including many of his former soldiers, with great emotions. Napoleon gained popular support, forcing the restored Bourbons and other nobles who had returned to France to flee again into exile. Napoleon managed to rule France for 100 days from March 1815 to June 1815. This then forced the Allies to abandon the meeting at Vienna and quickly mobilized a large force of about 800,000 troops, which finally fought and defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo in Belgium, and Napoleon was arrested as he tried to commit suicide. After his final defeat at Waterloo, Napoleon was arrested and exiled. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. In the Allies in this treaty opted to punish France for her betrayal. They then revised the first Paris Treaty that they had signed with Louis Roman XVIII, and it had some harsh terms. The Second Paris Treaty in November 1815 had the following provisions. I. The boundaries of France were to reduce to those of 1790. Roman II. France was to pay a heavy indemnity of 700 million francs, about £28. Roman III. France was to return the looted works of art to the Italian states, which Napoleon had plundered during the 1796–97 Italian military campaign. Roman IV. An army of occupation was to be stationed by the Allies in France to ensure that France doesn't again mobilize troops to disorganize European peace. Nobody from the Napoleonic lineage was to be allowed to rule France again. Buffer states were to be formed around France so as to check on European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Characterized by signing of treaties between Napoleon and European powers. Characterized by an economic war against Britain which caused economic insecurity. Characterized by marriage alliances. Characterized by signing a concordat with the Pope. Characterized by overtaxing the conquered people. Characterized by bloodshed, destruction of property. Characterized by European powers forming coalitions against France. Question. Examine the causes and consequences of the Napoleonic Wars between 1799–1815. Causes. Desire to create a Napoleonic empire and to gain personal glory and pride of himself. Ambition and desire to dominate Europe. Desire to spread the French revolutionary ideas. The desire to regain the territories for France as per the Treaty of European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon's rejection of Frankfurt policy. Formation of coalitions against Napoleon. Consequences/effects. Expanded French borders. Spread revolutionary ideas. Disorganized map of Europe. Created insecurity. Loss of lives. Destruction of property. Caused economic hardships like starvation, inflation. Led to imprisonment of the Pope. Violation of 1801 Concordat. Led to the rise of European nationalism, mostly among the conquered people who wished to regain their independence. Created unity among European powers as they formed coalitions. Led to the birth of European diplomacy. Led to the calling of the Vienna Congress 1814–15, which was aimed at finding solutions to the problems that Napoleon had created. Led to the defeat and eventual downfall of Napoleon. Evaluation of Napoleon's foreign policy. Question. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon's foreign policy started with an offensive against the Second Coalition. He was able to defeat the Austrians across the Alps, and later the Austrians were humbled at the Battle of Marengo, June 1801. Later on, Napoleon signed the Treaty of Lunéville with Austria, in which Austria gave up all territories west of the Rhine, Belgium and Luxembourg, to France. Napoleon spread the French revolutionary ideas to many parts of Europe, especially those countries that were under conservation's leadership, e.g. Italian and German states. In these states, French influence was equally spread. Napoleon was able to reconcile with the Catholic states, more so with the Pope. Napoleon signed a concordat with the Pope in 1801, which agreement tried to reconcile France with the Pope after relations had been strained by the July 1790 civil constitution of clergy, hence achievement. Napoleon created a large French empire through military conquests and treaty signing in which he acquired territories in France, and by so doing, Napoleon changed the balance of power in Europe in favour of France. Napoleon Bonaparte helped to spread constitutionalism and republicanism in Europe. Napoleon granted a liberal constitution to the Kingdom of Westphalia under his brother Jerome Bonaparte. In other Italian and German states that were under French influence, constitutional reforms were made based on the French model, hence an achievement. Napoleon Bonaparte established a Bonapartist dynasty in Europe where he placed his relatives to administer the conquered states, e.g. Joseph. Bonaparte was made king of Naples and later Spain. Louis Bonaparte was made king of Holland, while his other brother Jerome Bonaparte was made king of Westphalia. This Napoleonic dynasty helped to entrench French influence in Europe. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon led to the abolition of feudalism in the conquered states under French influence. In states like Prussia and other Italian states, feudalism was abolished as well as feudal laws, and the peasants got a right of possessing land, hence an achievement. Napoleon abolished despotism which had existed in many European countries before the outbreak of the French Revolution of 1789, e.g. in France, Italian and Germany states. Arbitrary arrests, which were the order of the day, were abolished by Napoleon. Napoleon's foreign policy laid the foundation for the unification of the Italian and Germany states. Napoleon created the Cisalpine Republic in 1802 after defeating the Austrians and forcing them out of the Italian states. In 1806, Napoleon created the Confederation of the Rhine, which was composed of Germany states. Such reforms made by Napoleon laid the foundation for the future unification of Italian states in 1870 and Germany states in 1870, when I extended the idea of statehood on which the Italians and Germans built their creation of one state, hence an achievement registered by Napoleon. Napoleon's foreign policy enhanced unity among European powers. Because of Napoleon's aggressive foreign policy, European powers were forced to join in cooperation that formed coalitions, i.e. the Third in 1805 and Fourth Coalition of 1813 were formed by European powers so as to defeat Napoleon, and in the process European powers forged unity amongst themselves in an attempt to defeat Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte made infrastructural development in Europe which linked France to the rest of Europe. By 1811 Napoleon had constructed over 220 broad and durable roads, but most importantly was the European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon introduced the Code Napoleon in conquered states, i.e. Italian and Germany states, Belgium, etc., in which basic human rights were properly spelt out. The Code Napoleon became the most convenient and enlightened set of laws in the whole world, and in fact many European states, e.g. Austria, Spain, Germany states, Belgium, etc., adopted the Napoleonic Code/laws, thus an achievement. Napoleon also entered temporary alliances with other European states, e.g. he managed to ally with Denmark and Spain in an attempt to defeat Great Britain after the renewal of war with Britain in 1803. In 1810, Napoleon entered a marriage alliance with Austria when he married Marie-Louise, Austrian princess. Napoleon promoted diplomacy in Europe, i.e. after defeating Napoleon I at Battle of Leipzig in 1813, Battle of Nations, European statesmen converged at the Austrian capital Vienna from 1814–1815, during which Congress they tried to come up with solutions to the problems that Napoleon had created in Europe. This Vienna Congress later led to the birth of the Congress system in 1880–1830. The failures of Napoleon's foreign policy included that following the Napoleonic Wars created political instability in Europe. Through these endless wars, e.g. wars against the Second, Third and Fourth Coalition, Napoleon disrupted European peace, which in the end affected a number of people, thereby learning them miserable. Napoleon's foreign policy led to loss of lives, e.g. many French soldiers. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon caused economic insecurity in Europe through his continental system and through his endless wars which blocked trade links. Napoleon's continental system disrupted international trade and in the end caused scarcity of essential goods, inflation and other economic hardships in France, Russia, Spain, the Papal States, etc., and that left many European masses suffering. Napoleon Bonaparte led to increased militarism in Europe. Napoleon formed a strong army through compulsory military conscription. It was with this army that Napoleon was able to fight wars of conquest as well as creating a big French empire. Due to Napoleon's aggressive wars, European countries were equally alarmed, and in the end they also built strong armies ready to challenge Napoleon, and this in the end led to militarism in Europe. Napoleon's foreign policy resulted into the imprisonment of the Pope. In 1809, Napoleon annexed the Papal States to his Napoleonic Empire and arrested and imprisoned the Pope for having violated his continental system against Britain. However, that was a great blunder that provoked hostility from especially the Catholic states and that later contributed to His downfall. Napoleon Bonaparte overthrew legitimate rulers and replaced them with his relative. Jerome Bonaparte was made king of Westphalia. Louis Bonaparte was made king of Holland. Joseph Bonaparte was made king of Spain. This creation of a Napoleonic dynasty in Europe led to the rise of European nationalism throughout Europe, which later contributed to his downfall. Napoleon explored the conquered territories through overtaxation. So was European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. And Italian states, Poland and Denmark, were all put under French control. However, these conquests disorganized the map of Europe by changing the balance of power in favor of France at the expense of other states. Napoleon later revived oppressive rule in Europe. By 1810, Napoleon had revived arbitrary arrests to try and reduce opposition against his continental system in France, Germany states, Italian states, and several conquered states. Napoleon Bonaparte also strictly censored the press to try and check on opposition against his rule, especially in the conquered states. Therefore, such repressive measures made Napoleon unpopular. Napoleon's education reforms limited women's opportunity to have education. By that, Napoleon was disregarding the revolutionary ideal of equality. In addition, Napoleon abolished the teaching of liberal arts, subjects like philosophy, literature, and history in conquered states. This made Napoleon's rule unpopular in Europe, especially in Italian and Germany states that were directly under his control and part of French Empire. Question. Assess the impact of Napoleon's policies on Europe. Approach. Relevant introduction on Napoleon. Focus on his foreign policies. Clear standpoint. Positive impact and then the negative impact. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. 1. Through the treaty signing, which was a tool that he employed to dominate Europe. Napoleon would ensure that the defeated powers signed treaties in which they would accept defeat and where Napoleon would acquire territories for France. By the Treaty of Amiens of 1802, France acquired Spain and Holland. In the peace treaty of Tilsit of 1807 with Russia, the Russians are recognized Emperor Napoleon as Emperor of Western Europe. Hence, the above scenario enabled Napoleon to dominate and control Europe between 1800 and 1814. Through the Napoleonic dynasty also enabled Napoleon to dominate Europe. It should be noted and recalled that Napoleon created a Bonaparte family dynasty where he used his close friends and relatives to manage his French Empire cases. In point, Louis Bonaparte was made king of Holland, Jerome Bonaparte was made king of Westphalia, Joseph Bonaparte was made king of Naples and later Spain. These ones became his eyes and ears in such areas, hence such nepotism enabled Napoleon to use his trusted relatives and friends to effectual control and dominate Europe between 1800 1814. 3. Napoleon Bonaparte signed the Concordat of 1801 with the Pope, something that also enabled Napoleon control and dominate Europe between 1800 and 1814. This agreement with the Pope Pius Roman XVII helped to bring about reconciliation between the Pope, the Catholic Church, and the government in France after relations had been strained by the Civil Constitution of Clergy of 1790. The 1801 Concordat won Napoleon support not only from the Catholics in France, but across Europe, Italian and Germany Catholic states. And European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. Censorship helped Napoleon administration in France and the conquered states, hence leading to the domination of Europe by Napoleon between 1800 and 1815. 5. Napoleon Bonaparte used marriage alliances as tools to enable and consolidate his position in Europe. In 1810, Napoleon married an Austrian Princess Marie Louise. Through this marriage, Napoleon improved on his relations with Austria, and that's why Austria remained France's ally not until 1813 when she joined the Fourth Coalition, but the marriage connection between Napoleon and Austria had enabled Napoleon control and dominate Austria and later Europe in general between 1800 and 1814. 6. Napoleon created a strong French economy in France which was characterized by financial reforms, infrastructural development, judicial reforms, etc. Therefore, the strong French economy was able to support Napoleon's foreign ventures, and the strong French economy enabled Napoleon to finance his conquest elsewhere in Europe, something that finally enabled Napoleon to dominate Europe between 1800 and 1814. 7. Napoleon created a strong army which also enabled him to control and dominate Europe between 1800 and 1814. Napoleon enforced forceful military conscription of especially the conquered masses into the French army. Thereafter, Napoleon was able to train and create an efficient which he used to conquer a number of territories for France, Italian states, Germany states, Belgium, etc., and by so doing so enabling him to dominate and control Europe between 1800 and 1814. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815 ensured that tributes and the war indemnity was paid by conquered states. Napoleonism was also useful in maintaining law and order and suppressing any form of resistance against Napoleon's administration in the conquered states, i.e. Italian and other states, and that helped Napoleon dominate and control Europe between 1800–1814. 8. Napoleon used the continental system to dominate Europe for a short while. Napoleon declared an economic war against Britain in which he planned to close all European gates to English trade, and for some time Napoleon managed to frustrate the trade and consumption of British manufactured goods in France and other areas on the European continent. Although Napoleon's continental system was a boomerang because of the adverse effects it caused even to the people of France, Napoleon managed to temporarily dominate and control European trade for a short while. 9. Napoleon also forged alliances with especially conquered states of France that enabled him to control and dominate Europe between 1800–1814. In 1802, Napoleon managed to enter an alliance with Denmark, Sweden, and Switzerland, which alliance was intended to isolate Britain after Napoleon had failed to defeat Britain militarily. Although this alliance was short-lived, Napoleon managed to use it to control and dominate Europe between 18,000–1814. 10. Napoleon's centralized administration, where all power was European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. His administration in these conquered states, hence enabling him to control and dominate Europe between 1800–1814. 11. The social economic developments or reforms that Napoleon registered in conquered states, i.e. Italian and German states, also enabled him to control and dominate Europe. Napoleon carried on with the reforms he made in France into the conquered states. For example, he introduced a fair taxation system based on pay not birth. He made infrastructural developments, judicial reforms, financial reforms in the conquered states. Such positive reforms earned Napoleon support, especially in the conquered states of Italian and Germany territory, something that enabled him to control and dominate Europe between 1800–1814. 12. Napoleon Bonaparte used the French revolutionary ideas of equality, fraternity, and liberty as a means of controlling and dominating Europe. He spread the revolutionary ideas of equality, liberty, and fraternity especially to subjects/people who had been under oppressive rule, for example in the Italian and Germany states that had for a long time been under Austrian oppressive rule. Therefore those masses in the conquered states welcomed Napoleon, on whom they referred to as a liberator and their savior, and so they accepted his rule, and that alone enabled Napoleon to control and dominate Europe between 1800–1814. 13. Napoleon Bonaparte also dominated and controlled Europe between 1800–1814. The French Empire that he created and divided into republics for easy administrative purposes, e.g. Confederation of the Rhine. In Italian states he combined them into Cisalpine Republic, etc. These were administrative units that entrusted to people who were loyal to him, i.e. his close friends and relatives, and these ensured effective controls of these states, and the order came from Paris. Napoleon in France, e.g. Louis Bonaparte of Holland, Jerome Bonaparte of Westphalia, Joseph Bonaparte of Spain, etc. Therefore creating a proper administrative structure like what he did in Germany, an Italian state, enabled Napoleon to dominate European political affairs between 1800–1814. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon Bonaparte's consolidation of power in France between 1799–1814. Question 1. How did Napoleon Bonaparte consolidate his leadership in France between 1799–1814? 2. How Napoleon Bonaparte was able to gain and retain power in France in 1799–1815. Gain rise to power. Retain consolidation. By consolidation of power, it means how Napoleon Bonaparte strengthened his position as a leader in France. It also means how Napoleon was able to retain or what enabled him to rule with minimal opposition. Napoleon Bonaparte employed both diplomatic, physical means and regressive measures to try and consolidate power in France, and he used the following means. 1. Napoleon used reconciliation as a tool to retain power in France. He reconciled with the former enemies of the revolution, especially the Emigrants and the Royalists. Laws that had been signed by the revolutionary government against the emigrants were relaxed, and the emigrants were allowed to return and incorporated into administration. Those in prisons were pardoned and released. This helped to foster reconciliation and to ease social tension in France, hence enabling Napoleon to consolidate his position. 2. Napoleon censored the press, and that helped to reduce opposition against his administration. Critical newspapers were banned from circulation, and by 1810 the number of newspapers in circulation. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Strict spy network and the police force that cracked down on the activities of his opponents. Public debates and any form of association was banned. This enabled Napoleon to suffocate the opposition against his rule, and thus enabling him to consolidate/strengthen power/leadership in France between 1799 and 1814. 4. Napoleon Bonaparte revived arbitrary arrest imprisonment without trial, and this was one of the ways through which he consolidated his position in France. In 1810, Napoleon brought back the infamous lettres de cachet sealed letters of the ancient Bourbon monarchy in France, where arbitrary arrests were made and all suspected political opponents of Napoleon's administration were arrested, imprisoned, retained without trial, and this helped to check opposition against Napoleon's rule in France, hence enabling Napoleon to consolidate his position of leadership or power in France between 1799 and 1814. 5. Napoleon Bonaparte further consolidated his power by carrying out intellectual repression, controlling education system where he banned the teaching of critical liberal arts subjects such as political science, history, philosophy, and literature. He feared that these liberal subjects would politically awaken the consciousness of the French masses and expose them to his weaknesses. Therefore, by banning the teaching of these subjects, Napoleon reduced possible criticism against his rule, which helped him to consolidate power in France between 1799 and 1814. 6. Napoleon Bonaparte banned the activities of trade unions throughout France. Napoleon came to realize that trade unions were a source of strikes and demonstrations caused unrest in France. Thereby outlawing the activities of trade unions, Napoleon European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. 7. Napoleon over-centralized power in his hands both as first consul and later as emperor. All powers were in the hands of the first consul that he created played a mere advisory work to Napoleon, i.e. Abbasias as second consul and Roger Dorcas as third consul. Napoleon never acknowledged the desire for a representative system of government, and he also feared elective assemblies, i.e. he never organized elections. Such despotism enabled Napoleon to maintain his position in France between 1799 and 1814. 8. Napoleon increasingly became a dictator when he made himself consul for life and later emperor in 1804. He arrested and imprisoned his political opponents, censored the press, among other repressive measures. Such dictatorship gave Napoleon a grip on power that enabled him to control his subjects, hence a sign of consolidation. 9. Napoleon Bonaparte used nepotism as a means of strengthening his position in France. He appointed his relatives into key government positions, e.g. he appointed his brother Lucien Bonaparte to be minister, his mother was made empress of France, etc. This nepotism promoted loyalty and service towards Napoleon, with minimal opposition against his administration, i.e. they became his eyes and ears, i.e. he could easily know whatever was happening in the country, and that helped him to consolidate his power in France. 10. Napoleon Bonaparte used sectarianism/favoritism to consolidate his leadership in France. Napoleon, through his Legion of Honor, appointed Bonapartist loyalists into key government positions, e.g. appointed friends and Bonapartist supporters to serve as prefect and sub-prefects, and all these did their work with a lot of loyalty and submission to Napoleon. 11. Napoleon Bonaparte also carried out administrative purging/cleansing where he replaced his political European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815 opposition against his administration, and thereby consolidating power in France. 12. Napoleon Bonaparte reconciled with the Roman Catholic Church in France, and that won him support from the majority Catholics, which enabled him to consolidate his position. In 1801, Napoleon signed a concordat with the Pope, which agreement reduced the tension that had been created between the Church and the State by the 1790 Civil Constitution of the Clergy. Through the concordat, Napoleon recognized Catholicism as the state religion, i.e. the faith of the majority Frenchmen and its rulers, and the Church in France renewed its relations with Rome. This agreement was welcomed by majority Catholics in France, who ended supporting Napoleon and his leadership, hence enabling him to consolidate his leadership in France between 1799 and 1814. 13. Napoleon Bonaparte further consolidated his position in France between 1800 and 1814 through the creation of a strong army. He put in place forceful conscription into the army, military conscription, which enabled him to create a big military force. With this disciplined army in place, he was able to maintain law and order by crushing internal opponents using his army, and above all, the strong army fought and defeated the entire continent save Britain because of her naval supremacy, and this brought glory seekers, and this also made Napoleon to become very popular in France. Hence, the above scenario enabled Napoleon to consolidate his position in France between 1799 and 1814. European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. General economic and social development in France, thereby making Napoleon became very popular, which popularity enabled him to consolidate his position as a ruler in France between 1799–1814. 15. Napoleon also consolidated his position as a ruler of France between 1799–1814 by maintaining a glorious foreign policy that diverted domestic opposition against his leadership, i.e. Napoleon's defeat of the Second Coalition in 1803 and military victories against Austria at the Battle of Austerlitz, Prussia at the Battle of Jena, Russia at the Battle of Friedland between 1802 and 1807 made the people of France, especially the glory seekers, happy and therefore supported Napoleon's leadership, hence a sign of consolidation. 16. Napoleon Bonaparte also consolidated his position of leadership in France between 1799–1814 through constitutional changes, i.e. after assuming power in 1799, changed the constitution in his favour, e.g. he abolished the old constitution of 1795 and introduced a new one in 1800 which favoured his interest. Napoleon became the first consul with unlimited powers, i.e. he formulated laws, appoint or dismiss all civil, official and military officers. With this authority, Napoleon ensured that state policies were directed in a way that favoured his interests, something that enabled him to retain power between 1799–1814. The downfall of Napoleon Bonaparte in 1815. The rise and fall of Napoleon Bonaparte was one of the most interesting scenarios in the history of Europe. A commoner by origin earned himself a European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Everywhere. His overwhelming ambition led to wars of conquest against neighbouring countries to build French Empire. This led to Napoleonic wars that exhausted him and forced these countries into coalition, i.e. third and fourth, that finally led to his downfall in 1815. Question: to what extent did Napoleon's overwhelming ambition contribute to his downfall by 1815? Two-sided question. Role of overwhelming ambition in his downfall. Napoleon's overwhelming ambition made him to introduce the continental system that backfired and led to Napoleon's downfall. The overwhelming ambition made Napoleon to declare wars against countries like Austria and Britain, which wars drained their resources in France, that Napoleon lose popularity, i.e. made him imprison the Pope in 1809. It forced him to create a dynastic policy, which policy aroused European nationalism. It forced him to arrange a marriage with Marie-Louise. His too much ambition led him to a stage peninsula. It forced him to create a large Napoleonic empire, which was too vast for him to effectively administer. He acquired so many territories, and that led to the rise of European nationalism. Led to Moscow military campaign of 1811–12 that greatly weakened his army, i.e. lost 410,000 soldiers. His excessive ambition drove him into many wars of conquest that led to bloodletting, and in the end European powers decided to form the Fourth Coalition that defeated him at the Battle of Leipzig in 1813 and finally at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Withstand the persecution and suffering caused by the continental system. Because of Britain's naval superiority, Britain was able to defeat Napoleon at the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805 and exposed Napoleon's naval inferiority, and Britain led the Fourth Coalition that finally led to the defeat of Napoleon in 1815 at the Battle of Waterloo. 3. Napoleon's antagonism with the Catholic Church, imprisonment of the Pope in 1809. It should be noted and recalled that when the Pope got tired of doing without British manufactured goods during the continental system, he declared himself neutral and freely allowed the Papal States to trade with Britain. Napoleon became openly hostile towards the Pope, and in 1808 Napoleon invaded the Papal States, and in 1809 Napoleon arrested and jailed the Pope. This quarrel with the Pope undermined Napoleon's moral position and popularity in a predominantly Catholic French state. This approach created enmity to Napoleon both within and outside France, and it's surprising that the Catholic states like Austria, Holland, Spain, Naples, etc. joined the Third and Fourth Coalitions against Napoleon that finally led to his downfall in 1815. 4. The growth of European nationalism and desire for independence also contributed to Napoleon's downfall in 1814. Napoleon's conquest and domination of the conquered states awakened the spirit of nationalism and desire for independence, especially among the conquered people, e.g. the Germans, the Italians, Poles, Spanish, the Dutch, etc. The national consciousness of the conquered people was heightened by Napoleon's dynastic policy of using his relatives to govern the foreign areas. Also, Napoleon's oppressive rule that was characterized by forceful conscription, military conscription into the European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Napoleon had created a vast or big French empire that stretched from the Adriatic Sea to the Baltic Sea, comprising of several territories like Germany states, Italian states, Holland, Denmark, Switzerland, etc. Napoleon's empire was multiracial, multilingual, speaking multiple languages, and multicultural. This expensive empire became increasingly difficult and hard for Napoleon's alone to effectively manage the conquered areas. Therefore, France became too big for Napoleon to administer, hence a big empire ended up overworking him and drained the resources of France, and it required a big army which had to be fed, hence leading to his downfall in 1815. 6. Napoleon Bonaparte's dynastic policy also made Napoleon's downfall inevitable by 1815. By 1811, it was not France but rather Napoleon who commanded Europe in an attempt to effectively manage his Napoleonic empire. Napoleon appointed his relatives to assist him govern the conquered areas, e.g. his eldest brother Joseph. Bonaparte was made king of Naples and later Spain. His third brother, Louis Bonaparte, was made king of Holland. His other brother Jerome Bonaparte was made king of the Rhine lands, and his sister Caroline, who had married Marat, a great French general, became the king of Naples. Therefore, this dynastic policy roused anti-French sentiments in areas where Napoleon installed his friends and relatives to rule, and that forced the conquered masses to raise up against Naples, i.e. such small states joined the big powers in the third and fourth coalitions, e.g. Naples, Spain, Holland, etc., that finally led to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815. 7. The heterogeneous nature of the French army also made Napoleon's downfall inevitable by 1815. By 1812, the French army had lost its original outlook. Initially, the army was comprised of only French. European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815 to join their mother countries in the fight against Napoleon, thereby contributing to Napoleon's downfall in 1815. 8. The decline in home support, i.e. the loopholes/weaknesses in his domestic policy, also led to Napoleon's downfall in 1815. This was as a result of Napoleon's weaknesses in his domestic internal policy, i.e. by 1813 Napoleon had become unpopular among the French people, i.e. in his education policy. He denied girls' education. The elementary education, i.e. nursery and primary, was left under Catholic Church, revived arbitrary arrests, practiced nepotism, banned trade unions, his dictatorship, censorship of the press, etc. The above loophole in domestic of Napoleon made him become very unpopular, to the extent that when he made his comeback from Elba in 1814, few French people rallied behind him, something that finally led to defeat in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. 9. The decline of the French economy by 1813 also led to the downfall of Napoleon in France. It should be noted and recalled that the revolutionary and Napoleonic wars greatly drained the French resources, i.e. money, that caused social and economic problems, e.g. industrial breakdown, high unemployment, poverty, etc. And this drove the French people back to the period before 1789 and greatly made them hate Napoleon and his policies, hence making him become unpopular, something that led to his downfall in 1815. 10. The Continental System of 1806 and its effects also led to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815. The Continental System was an economic war against Britain and any other countries that wanted to fight against France. Napoleon issued the Berlin Decree. European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. However, this led to a lot of suffering to the people of Europe, France inclusive, e.g. scarcity of British goods, leading to inflation, unemployment, poverty, etc. Therefore, as a result of the Continental System and its effects, European countries were forced to form coalitions, i.e. third and fourth, against Napoleon that fought and defeated in 1815. 11. Napoleon Bonaparte's divorce of Josephine made him become unpopular and greatly contributed to his downfall in 1815. It should be recalled that in 1810, after divorcing Josephine, a French woman and a former mistress and daughter of Paul de Barras, one of the directors of the Directory government, Napoleon married an Austrian Princess Marie-Louise. However, this marriage connection was hated by the French masses because it reminded them of another Austrian woman, Marie Antoinette, who was a wife to King Louis Roman XVI and whose weaknesses had contributed to the outbreak of the French of 1789. Therefore, Napoleon's marriage to Marie-Louise increased his unpopularity in France and finally led to his downfall in 1815. 12. The Peninsular War of 1808 also contributed to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815. In an attempt to enforce the Continental System, Napoleon was forced to open war against Spain and Portugal in the Iberian Peninsula. However, Portugal and Spain were supported by Britain, and therefore they were able to challenge Napoleon's troops in the net war. Napoleon lost about 300,000 troops, which weakened militarily, i.e. his brother Joseph Bonaparte he imposed on the Spanish people, led to the guerrilla war that greatly weakened Napoleon's army in Spain, and Napoleon referred it as the Spanish also as the Cinq-Mille. Therefore, the Peninsular War of 1808 weakened Napoleon militarily, that partly contributed to his defeat in the Fourth Coalition in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. 13. Napoleon Bonaparte's exhaustion and lack of foresight also contributed to his downfall by 1815. Many historians assert that by 1812 Napoleon was no longer what he had been in 1799. Napoleon. European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. had been exhausted because of his many military ventures that were driven by his slogan: "A normal man sleeps for 2 hours, a woman sleeps for 4 hours, a fool sleeps for 8 hours. Therefore, with growing age 47 years, Napoleon became exhausted, and he lacked foresight that made him make tactical errors in his military campaigns where he could no longer effectively plan or even pre-see the outcome of his military actions. This lack of foresight and exhaustion made Napoleon to make military blunders, i.e. during the Moscow military campaign of 1811-12, he didn't carry winter coats for his soldiers, who died of coldness. Hence, the above scenario led to the defeat of Napoleon at the battlefronts and in the end contributed to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815. 14. The copying of Napoleon's fighting military tactics by his enemies also led to his downfall in 1814. Napoleon all along had a monopoly of fighting skills or tactics among his soldiers compared to his enemy forces, but as the time rolled by, the enemy forces began copying his military skills and fighting tactics such that by 1814 his skills and fighting tactics became outdated compared to the new and improved fighting tactics of other European countries like Britain, Prussia, Russia, Austria, etc. Therefore, it's not surprising that the Allied coalition fought and defeated him in 1814 and in the final Battle of Waterloo of 1815, hence leading to his downfall. 15. The Moscow military campaign of 1811-12 also led to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815. Napoleon's mistake or blunder of marching onto Moscow and his defeat by the Russians became a turning point in his political career as soldier and as a statesman. It should be recalled that Tsar Alexander of Russia had also got tired of going out without British manufactured goods during the continental system. Therefore, he decided to become neutral and freely traded with Britain. This annoyed Napoleon, who decided to punish the Tsar for bad manners, i.e. marched 610,000 soldiers, crossed River Nines, and went back to France with only 20,000 soldiers. Napoleon lost. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Hence this was a big blow to Napoleon and came to be known as a boomerang that partly contributed to his final defeat in 1815. 16. The determination of the Allies, i.e. the Fourth Coalition, also led to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815. The Allies included Austria, Prussia, Britain, Spain, etc., who were determined to fight and defeat Napoleon's oppressive and dictatorial rule in Europe, i.e. they swore not to separate until Napoleon was defeated, and in the Treaty of Chaumont of 1814, the Allies called up Napoleon to give up all conquests, thus reducing the French boundary to the pre-revolutionary borders in exchange for ceasefire, failure to which the pledge to continue the war against France. Therefore, the Fourth Coalition was determined to defeat Napoleon once and for all, hence this led to the final defeat of Napoleon in the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. 17. The desertion of Napoleon by his close allies at home that he badly needed at this time also led to his downfall in 1815, i.e. Marshal Bernadotte of Spain, General Fouch, Minister of Police, and Bishop Talleyrand, the Foreign Minister, betrayed Napoleon and joined the Allies to defeat Napoleon's forces, i.e. Marshal Bernadotte advised the enemy forces that when you meet Napoleon's generals, attack, but when you meet Napoleon, retreat. Therefore, the above scenario led to the defeat of Napoleon in subsequent battles that finally led to his defeat at Waterloo in 1815. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. The Moscow military campaign of 1811–12 weakened Napoleon militarily. Napoleon dispatched about 610,000 troops that crossed Nemen into Moscow. However, of the 610,000 troops that entered Moscow, only 20,000 re-entered France, i.e. Napoleon lost about 580,000 troops and about 32,000 horses. This greatly weakened Napoleon militarily, i.e. lost most of experienced soldiers, something that weakened his army, hence contributing to his downfall in 1815. The Moscow military campaign of 1811–12 undermined Napoleon's popularity in France. The French people were shocked by the great loss of their soldiers, resources, and horses. The French masses came to hate Napoleon because of the great loss of them. French soldiers who perished in the campaign and consequently to his downfall in 1815. After the defeat in Moscow, there was increased European nationalism, especially in the conquered states against Napoleon, and many European powers were inspired to also rise up against Napoleon. The Germans, Italians were inspired by the Russian victory over Napoleon to stage up a resistance against Napoleon, which later contributed to his downfall. The failure of the Moscow military campaign of 1811–12 forced European powers to form the Fourth Coalition against Napoleon. After Napoleon's defeat in Moscow, England spearheaded the formation. European history: Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. These heavy taxes, however, made Napoleon unpopular and made people to resist his administration, and led to his downfall in 1815. The Moscow military campaign of 1811–12 drained the French economy and resources in general. Napoleon was forced to use the French funds to try and support the French troops during the Moscow campaign, however, that weakened the French economy and made it hard for Napoleon to make economic progress at home, thereby generating resistance against his administration that later contributed to his downfall in 1815. The Moscow military campaign led to the death of Napoleon's most trusted generals and well-trained forces. This in the end forced Napoleon to hurriedly recruit inexperienced soldiers into his army who were easily defeated in the subsequent battles, e.g. at the Battle of Leipzig in 1813 and later his final defeat at Waterloo in 1815, which contributed to his downfall in 1815. The Moscow military campaign of 1811–12 led to the desertion of Napoleon's close allies. Due to increased bloodshed and exhaustion of Napoleon's army officers, some of them decided to defeat to the enemy camp, e.g. Napoleon's foreign minister Talleyrand vouched in charge of police and Bernadotte deserted Napoleon. They later leaked Napoleon's military tactics and secrets to the enemy camp, which military tactics were later used against Napoleon, hence leading to Napoleon's final defeat and eventual downfall. The Moscow military campaign of 1811–12 led to massive destruction of property as well as causing economic hardship in Europe. The Russians employed the Scotch death policy where they European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. The Moscow campaign of 1811–12 caused economic hardships such as inflation, shortage of essential commodities because of the destruction the war caused. This in the end caused suffering on the Russians and other European masses that are dependent on Russian trade. This in the end arose against Napoleon and consequently led to his downfall. After the Moscow campaign, in which Napoleon was defeated, European powers agreed to cooperate in the fight against Napoleon. France lost her former allies like Prussia and Austria, who joined Napoleon's enemies, e.g. Prussia entered an alliance with Russia when they signed the Kalisz Treaty of Feb 1813, in which they agreed to support each other in any war against Napoleon, and indeed Prussia and Russia joined other powers in the Fourth Coalition that defeated Napoleon in the Battle of Leipzig/Battle of All Nations, which led to Napoleon's downfall. The defeat of Napoleon in the Moscow military campaign of 181,112 encouraged European powers to form the Fourth Coalition. Britain spearheaded the formation of the Fourth Coalition, and she was later joined by other powers like Russia, Prussia and Austria that finally defeated Napoleon at the Battle of All Nations, and after which defeat Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba that marked his downfall. The contribution of Peninsular War of 1808 and the downfall of Napoleon questioned. 1. How did the Peninsular War of 1808 lead to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815? One-sided question, i.e. only Peninsular War in leading to the downfall of Napoleon. 2. To what extent did the Peninsular War of 1808 contribute to the European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815? Role of the Peninsular War of 1808. The Peninsular War weakened Napoleon militarily because he lost some of his soldiers, about 300,000 men. The Peninsular War drained the economy of France as a lot of resources were spent facilitating the French troops during the war. Napoleon was forced to impose heavy taxes on the French people and conquered masses so as to raise funds that would support his troops during the war. The defeat in the Peninsular War aroused European nationalism, as many other states were inspired to try and also fight against Napoleon, and that European nationalism contributed to Napoleon's downfall in 1815. Napoleon resorted to forceful military conscription after having lost some of his experienced soldiers during the Peninsular War, however, that increased Napoleon's unpopularity in France and Europe, which later led to his downfall in 1815. The defeat in the Iberian Peninsula led to the failure of Napoleon's continental system. Napoleon lost a number of troops which could have been used to enforce his continental system. However, the defeat in Peninsular War made Napoleon lose a number of troops, and in the end the continental system backfired because it was not properly enforced due to Napoleon's military weakness, hence leading to his downfall in 1815. The defeat in the Peninsular War led to Austria's renewed resistance. European history Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799–1815. Wagram in July 1809, they somehow weakened Napoleon's army, which military weakness was exploited by the Allies to finally defeat him at Leipzig in 1813 and later at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815. The Peninsular War of 1808 enabled Great Britain to get land base in the Iberian Peninsula, which she lacked before. Using this land base, Britain was able to launch attacks against Napoleon's forces on land, and also she was able to use that land to frustrate Napoleon's continental system, which in the end contributed to Napoleon's downfall in 1815. The Peninsular War of 1808, in which Napoleon was defeated, encouraged Russia to also resist Napoleon, and that in the end forced Napoleon to undertake the Moscow military campaign, which was disastrous to Napoleon. Napoleon's defeat in the Peninsular War encouraged European powers to form the Fourth Coalition that finally defeated Napoleon in the Battle of All Nations in 1813 and later at Waterloo in 1815, hence leading to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815. Summary of the factors for Napoleon's downfall: Britain's naval superiority, rise of European nationalism, continental system of 1806-7, Napoleon's domestic failures/loopholes, weakness of French economy, Napoleon's dynastic policy, Peninsula of 1808, Austria's renewed resistance, i.e. war ground 1809, European history, Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799-1815, Moscow military campaign of 1811-12, the Fourth Coalition of 1813, desertion of allies, overtaxation, lack of foresight plus exhaustion/fatigue. Question: to what extent did Great Britain contribute to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815 approach? Relevant introduction: how Britain led to Napoleon's downfall in 1815. Other factors: Britain's role, Britain's naval superiority. Britain supported Spain and Portugal in Peninsular War of 1808. Britain's secretary traded with Pope, which angered Napoleon and in the end made him conflict with the Pope in 1809. Britain passed the London Orders in Council that challenged Napoleon's continental system. Britain had a strong economy which she used to support other countries that were fighting against Napoleon. Britain strongly involved in Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo in 1815 by contributing troops commanded by General Wellington. Britain used the land base in the Iberian Peninsula to launch attacks against France, all which weakened France and in the end contributed to his downfall. European history, Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799-1815. Britain was part of the Vienna Congress of 1814-15, which sealed the fate of Napoleon by exiling Napoleon onto the island of St. Helena, thereby ending Napoleon's dominance in Europe, thus leading his eventual downfall. Britain was blessed with good leaders, e.g. Pitt Younger and later Lord Castlereagh, and these leaders used their leadership skills to effectively plan for Napoleon's downfall in 1815. Britain encouraged and morally supported the growth of European nationalism, which later led to Napoleon's downfall in 1815. Standpoint of the factors. Conclusion: role of Russia in downfall of Napoleon in 1815. Member of all coalitions, i.e. Third Coalition 1805 and Fourth Coalition 1813. Violated the peace treaty of Tilsit of 1807. Defied Napoleon's continental system, which led Moscow military campaign of 1811-12 that became a boomerang to Napoleon. Encouraged European resistance against Napoleon, e.g. signed the Kalisz Treaty of 1813 with Prussia, in which they assured each other of military support against France. Moscow military campaign of 1811-12 drained the French economy. European history, Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799-1815. Russia was opposed to Napoleon's marriage to Marie Louise Austrian princess. Russia was part of the Vienna Congress of 1814-15 that finally defeated Napoleon. Role of France towards Napoleon's downfall in 1815. Hated Napoleon's continental system, which led them French people to economic hardships. Weakness of French army. Weakness of French economy. French men were not satisfied with Napoleon, i.e. he imprisoned the Pope, the father of the Catholic world. Hated his overtaxation. Welcomed Napoleon on Rome, Elba in 1814, which forced the Allied. European history, Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799-1815. The formation of the Fourth Coalition in 1813 was the immediate factor contributed to Napoleon's downfall. After Napoleon's defeat in the Moscow military of 1811-12, European powers were still scared of Napoleon's military strength, and so they feared to directly attack Napoleon through River Rhine. The Allied powers then sent Napoleon a message, Frankfurt proposal, in which they were willing to make peace with him and not to fight him. However, Napoleon rejected the proposal and instead declared war on the Allies. The Allied powers organized themselves and finally defeated Napoleon's troops at the Battle of Leipzig in 1813, after which Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba in 1814. As European statesmen were holding the Vienna Congress, 18,141,815, Napoleon managed to escape from Elba and ruled France for 100 days. The European statesmen temporarily stopped the meeting and mobilized a huge army of about 800,000 troops under the command of General Wellington from Britain and Marshal Blucher from Prussia, and they finally defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo in 1815, hence leading to Napoleon's downfall. Questions for reference. 1. Account for the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte to power in France by 1799. 2. How did Britain lead to the downfall of Napoleon in 1815? 3. Without the French Revolution, Napoleon would have died. A common man discuss. 4. How did continental system contribute to the downfall of Napoleon in 1814? 5. To what extent did the continental system contribute to the downfall of Napoleon in 1814? 6. 7. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. 10. Assess Napoleon's policies 1799 to 1815, achievements and failures in both domestic plus foreign. 11. Examine the causes and consequences of Napoleonic wars between 1799–1815. 12. Examine the features of Napoleon's foreign policy. 13. Account for the formation of the Fourth Coalition against Napoleon. 1 in 1813. 14. Account for Napoleon's popularity in France by 1814. 15. How successful was Napoleon's domestic policy between 1799 and 1814? 16. Napoleon rose to power partly due to luck. Discuss. 17. How did Napoleon consolidate his power in France between 1800–1814? 18. To what extent were the weaknesses of the Directory government in France responsible for Napoleon's rise to power by 1799? The Vienna Congress between 1814 and 1815, and the Vienna Peace. Settlement of 1840–15. Background. After the downfall of Napoleon Bonaparte at the Battle of All Nations Leipzig in 1813, and Napoleon's exilment to the island of Elba in 1814, the major European powers that formed the Quadruple Four Alliance organized a Congress/meeting at Vienna, the capital of Austria. The major powers included Austria, Great Britain, Prussia, and Russia. They were for bog powers. European history. Napoleon Bonaparte between 1799 and 1815. Being an international congress, the meeting was well attended mostly by delegates from the big European powers, and they included Prince Metternich the chairman and Emperor Francis I from Austria, Lord Castlereagh and Wellington from Great Britain, Tsar Alexander I and Nesselrode from Russia, King Frederick William I and Hindenburg from Prussia, Bishop Talleyrand was called to represent France, while the Pope was represented by Cardinal Salba. Other small states were represented, but decision-making was dominated by the quadruple powers, i.e. Austria, Britain, Russia.